Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this Lincoln Mark VII. This car is my personal car. I've been working on it the last couple weeks, and I thought maybe it's a good time to talk about whether owning a Mark VII might be right for you. So I'm going to go through a few of the pros and cons of the Mark VII, and you can make up your own mind. Maybe give me some comments if you have one, what your experiences are, whether you'd recommend them to others. Just for starters, in case you guys need any background, I'm a pretty old school Foxbody guy. I've owned a lot of Foxbody Mustangs. I've raced a lot of Foxbody Mustangs. And I got to a stage where I felt like I didn't really want to build any more Mustangs, Foxbody Mustangs for myself, just because it seemed like it was doing the same old thing over and over and over again. So I've done lots of other things. I built a pretty cool Coyote street rod. I built a pretty wild Mistachrome Terminator, and so on. But I started to miss having a Foxbody Mustang to drive. So one day, this 90 Mark VII came up for sale. It's the same year and color as my wild 9-second Foxbody drag car. And I thought, why not? I'm gonna go out and buy this car, and then we'll do a heads cam intake, long tubes, torque converter, valve body, gears, etc. Build on it so it's built up like a, like a heads cam intake Fox Mustang, and I'm going to use it as a nostalgia cruiser. We're going to go to cruise-ins. We're going to take little road trips with it. My wife can come along. We can carry luggage, and so on. And it'll just be a fun little nostalgia cruiser. When I started on the project, I thought, no one would even like the car or know what it was, but I've been pleasantly surprised taking it around that it does get a reasonable amount of attention. It's a driver quality car, so it's not really winning any car shows, but it attracts enough attention from people that it's worthwhile taking it to a few actual shows as well as some casual cruise-ins, because there are people who are interested in it and want to know about the car. Let's talk about some of the pros of a car like this. Well, one of the first and most obvious pros of these cars versus, say, a Foxbody Mustang is that they cost less. At one point, like the point when I bought this car, they cost quite a lot less. In fact, these cars were so inexpensive at certain points that all kinds of guys were buying them and cutting them up just to get the engine. So it's a lot less costly to get into one of these cars. I checked Haggerty's valuation tool just before filming this video. It's Canadian valuation. Compared to a same condition GT hatchback Mustang of the same year, the Lincoln on Haggerty is valued around 2/3 as much. The values come up quite a bit beyond the cutting them up for other project stage, I think, but they're still quite a bit more affordable. The valuation on these cars is increasing. I'm not a big fan of suggesting that you buy a car for an investment, but I do think that the Mark has an appreciation potential. It's shown a recent appreciation history, and the good news is if you get one of these cars down the road, it's not going to be worthless. It's probably going to be worth more than you paid for it, as long as you've taken care of it. Okay, let's talk about the condition of the cars. That's another thing that I think is a plus on the Mark VII versus the Mustangs. If you go around looking at Foxbody Mustangs, it can be like a real horror show. A lot of those cars are a complete junk pile. Sometimes they're just in parts, like this Project Bad Decision that I have here. The usual story on a Foxbody Mustang is it left the dealership with the tires smoking. And the first stop was the speed shop before they even put gas in it. So they started cutting those cars up, putting electrical components in, cutting up the harness, putting speed parts on them almost right away. And then if you fast forward to today, in most cases, you're something like the 15th owner of one of those cars, and they can be a real nightmare. There's pretty well guaranteed to have been at least one real hatchet man in the background on the car, and when you start going through them, they can be a mess. The Mark VIIs, on the other hand, were typically owned by older people, people with garages. So these cars were often kept very nice. They had good maintenance programs on them. They're AOD automatics, so by default, they absolutely cannot be revved up very high, so the engines are usually good. That's a reason why guys have bought a lot of them and cut them up to get the engine, because they know the engine hasn't been abused. They've rarely been raced, and you know, this car, it was so unmolested that it had the tape wrap on the spout connector on the distributor. That means no one even ever bumped the timing on it. So that's how unmolested a lot of them are, even to this day. So you got a nice starting point with cars that are typically maintained, typically in decent shape, and typically unmolested. That's a stark contrast to most Foxbody Mustangs. And by the way, if you find a Foxbody Mustang like that today, you are going to pay a fortune. Just to give you an example, I know what I paid for this car. I helped someone, customer recently, sell a Fox Coupe that was a very nice car, a few speed parts on it, and a low mile car, an unmolested, mostly unmolested car, like in very nice shape. And the difference in price between that car and what I paid for this car, albeit 5 or 6 years ago, was something like 15 times. The next thing that's a pro in some ways, it's also a con in some other ways, is parts availability. Now, the Mark VII is basically a Foxbody Mustang in a tuxedo. They call it the brute in a suit, Wall Street Whaler, that kind of thing. Those are all nicknames these cars have. And it's got a powertrain that is straight out of the Mustang. That means that 302 HO motor and the AOD can accept all of the various speed parts that are available for Foxbody Mustangs. And for the most part, they just go on and work. So like this car, it's trick flow track heat heads, a trick flow stage 2 cam, a Edelbrock Performer RPM 2 manifold, it's got 75 mil throttle, it's got BBK long tube headers. Those are Mustang headers, and they don't really fit the 90 plus mark, but they can be made to fit, and with a little bit of judicious hammering, and you don't have to cut tubes or anything. So they're in the car. All of that kind of stuff can be put on the car, and you can upgrade the car so it's really got the same feel as a nicely built heads cam intake Foxbody Mustang, which is the kind of thing that a lot of guys, me included, really want as a nostalgia cruiser. Here's another pro about the car. The Mark VII was a supremely well-equipped car for its day. Much better equipped than a Foxbody Mustang. With the Mark VII, it still feels like a contemporary car when you drive it. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. It has automatic climate control. It has automatic headlights. It has automatic high beams. It has an autochromatic mirror. It has heated outside mirrors. It has an electric extendable antenna. It has an electric trunk pull down. It has inside temperature display. Seems like a little thing. The first year for inside temperature display in Mustang is 2010. It's got air suspension, it's got 4-channel ABS, it's got tilt steering. Now this is an airbag car, and remember when Ford went to airbags in the Mustang, they deleted the tilt steering option. I thought they couldn't make it work, but actually they could. It just cost too much for the Mustang, and they put it in the Lincoln, so you still got tilt steering. And you have, you know, your nicey nice regular features, power windows, power locks, cruise control. The Mark has 8-way power adjustable driver and passenger seats. Most of these features are features that you expect in even just a sort of run-of-the-mill driver today, but they are absolutely not in a Foxbody Mustang, and they are in this car. So when you drive it, you can have that sort of nostalgia power feel, but with a more contemporary experience inside the cab. One of the things that I think is a pro, if you like taking your car out to events, is that these cars are a little bit different. There aren't a pile of them, there's way less of them built than Mustangs, and there's a lot fewer of them survive. So They get a little more attention than Foxbody Mustangs, and I can tell you, I showed Mustangs of all stripes for years, and I was very taken aback when I started showing a street rod because my trophy count went through the roof with the street rod. I found it really hard to get any attention at especially small town car shows with a Mustang, and especially with a Foxbody Mustang. This car isn't winning any trophies because it's a sort of a driver class car, but it gets a lot more attention than, say, the 93 fridge project I've been working on, which I took around to a few shows at the end of season and was reminded how hard it is to get any lookers really on a Foxbody in a sort of general car show. So it's a little different, gets a little more attention, makes it a little more fun to take out to events. And that kind of leads into the next thing, which is it's a very nice driving car. The Lincoln's a way nicer car as far as a driving experience than the Mustang is. It's smoother, the air suspension is nice, the sound deadening is good. This car we actually call Project Neighbor Problem because I put on Flowmaster Super 44s, long tubes, X-pipe and so on, and it's kind of loud outside. But the first time my wife and I went for a highway cruise in it, about 50 miles up the road, my wife turns to me and says, "I don't know what's wrong with this car. You can just sit back and listen to the radio." And that's true. It's quiet inside, even with a traditional American Thunder exhaust on it on the outside, and I have a radio in it with Bluetooth and all of that, so that seems kind of contemporary. You can just sit back and listen to the radio and enjoy driving it. Another thing about driving the car is it has a big trunk. This is the exact opposite of a Foxbody coupe. You're one of those Foxbody coupes, you can barely put a briefcase in the stock trunk if you got a spare and stuff in there. So this is a big trunk. You can carry your car show stuff. I can carry nice chairs in the car. With the street rod, I carry the scrubbiest little chairs that I can possibly find because space is so constrained. With this car, I can carry some nice chairs, so it's more comfortable to sit around at a cruise night or a car show. I can carry suitcases in the car along with my car show supplies. I can even get an 8-inch telescope in here. So like if any of you guys are into astronomy, it's a car where you can haul your telescope to someplace, set it up, and still have room for a suitcase or whatever. That's really nice, and it's probably a consideration if you're going to use your nostalgia cruiser to go on little trips, especially if you have like a wife or a wife and kids. The back seat has a lot more space than a Mustang. So it's just a lot nicer car as far as a cruiser is concerned. Part for part, they're not as quick as a Mustang because they're a little heavier, all right. But as far as a nostalgia cruising experience, I think it's a way nicer experience than driving something like a GT Mustang. There's lots of positives on the Lincoln. Let's talk about some of the negatives, some of the things that you might be concerned about or that might frighten you away from driving one of these cars. First and foremost, they are air suspension cars. Now, I don't care what anybody says, air suspension is problematic no matter who made it. The bags fail over time, the compressors fail, the dryers fail, the lines fail, the wiring fails, the ride height sensors fail, even the little microcontroller that runs the whole system can fail. And that means that you can suddenly have a situation where everything's fine with the car really, but it's down on its knees and it cannot be driven because the wheels are up touching the wheel wells. That can be a very frustrating experience, and it's probably the #1 complaint that guys who are still driving these cars have. You can convert them to a reliable spring system. I didn't do it because I wanted to keep the car truer to its roots, but guys do convert them to springs. I hear various things about how the springs can damage the body. Some of these kits are not very good. You lose the beautiful smooth ride and the auto adjusting suspension. And in the future, as airbags for the cars become increasingly difficult to get, I think you're gonna see more spring conversions for guys who are keeping them on the road. But it's something you gotta be aware of. When it works, the air suspension is great. When it doesn't, it can be very frustrating. Let's talk about parts availability, because this is a good segue. The air suspension system, for instance, is one of the systems where there are parts available. You can get solenoids, you can get bags, you can get shocks and struts. You can't get the controllers, you can't get the ride height sensors. That stuff's all got to be taken from a parts car or a Good Samaritan or someone who's hoarding parts or whatever. If you have a Mark VII, it'd be shocking if you never had an airbag problem. I did mention parts availability as a pro. As far as the powertrain's concerned, there's lots of stuff you can do. As far as the rest of the car is concerned, there are no parts. I mean, you're out of luck. Sheet metal, trim, glass, specialty motors like the power sunroof motor or the extendable antenna motor or the trunk pull down. None of that stuff is available. It really isn't. So everybody who's serious about one of these cars, at least that I know, has at least one parts car. I got another one just like this. It's one that somebody bought to steal the engine out of, and they gave me the shell. So I dragged it home. I got it stuffed in a secret location, and you know, when something goes wrong on this car, it's great to have that parts car because you're just out of luck with pretty well anything that's specific to the car. If there's something wrong with this car, you got to get parts from a parts car, you got to get parts from a hoarder, a Samaritan, or manufacture them yourself. There's just no two ways about it. And there are lots of cars you can own that are like that. The Mark VII is one of them. And as time is going on, even some of the functional parts that have been available, like the R-nut airbags, for instance, are going away. So you got to stash an inventory if you plan to keep one of these going. It can be a major downside if you're not someone who's in a position to fix a car that has problematic parts supply. Okay, another little con about the car is, while I mentioned that there are lots of powertrain parts you can put in, if you're going to put these kind of things in, heads, cam intake, that kind of stuff, you are going to have to be able to program the car. And the Lincoln engine management system is, you might as well say, non-programmable. You're going to have to put a standalone in. A standalone that works really well with these cars is the Mega Squirt 2 plug and play. That's what's in this car. It just plugs right in. The only thing you have to do is ground one wire in the PCM harness so that your horn works. However, you've got to be advised that while the Mustang has a separate cruise control computer, the Lincoln does not. That cruise control system is built into the PCM on the Lincoln. So if you switch to a standalone, you're going to lose your cruise control. I think that problem can be resolved fairly easily with something like an aftermarket Rostra control. Guys could retrofit a Mustang cruise control system into it, I guess. But if you ask me, the path of least resistance is a aftermarket cruise control. It's key to understand, if you're going to start modifying the car, you got to have budget for a standalone. You could use a Holley Terminator X as well. That would be fine. But because the harnesses are usually good in these cars, an MS2 plug and play is pretty good option, and I think a path of least resistance option, if you ask me. I guess another thing that I'm going to mention as a downside on the Mark VII is sort of enthusiast support. So there's a club, the Lincoln Mark VII Club. It's a national club. It was founded and it used to be run by a guy called John Dancy. Now, John was a guy who loved these cars. He collected them. He had piles of parts for them, and they were his real passion. And he's the element that was essentially the glue in that club. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say, John has passed on. So that club is now a lot more fractured than it ever was. There used to be a forum that had lots of good information. The forum has been lost. I think some of that information has probably just disappeared into the ether. Some of the guys who were involved, I think, have kind of disappeared as well. And so enthusiast support for the cars, while it used to be fairly strong, is waning a little bit. So you got to consider that by and large, you're going to be on your own. There are guys who will help you, just guys like me who often pick up the phone and answer questions for guys, although I have limits on my time for that. But you're going to be kind of on your own. With a Mustang, there are tens of thousands of guys who might help you. There's an incredibly strong following. Virtually every part that you can imagine for the cars, with a few maddening exceptions, is available in reproduction. So you're not going to have much trouble keeping a Mustang on the road. With a Mark VII, this is probably its biggest challenge, keeping it on the road, because you're kind of on your own when it comes to parts, help, and so on. Well, let's get to a conclusion. Would I recommend that you buy a Mark VII right now? Yeah, I think I would. You have to be the kind of person who can deal with parts challenges and who can, solve problems independently. But I'll tell you, when it comes to hot rodding, there's always a solution. There's always a way to make it work. It's just a matter of your time and money and persistence. So these kind of problems can be overcome. I actually really enjoy mine, and having driven a nicely optioned GT hatchback Foxbody Mustang a little this summer, I have come to the conclusion that I much prefer driving the Lincoln. I'm probably going to sell that 93 Mustang. I'm going to keep this Lincoln, and this is going to be my nostalgia cruiser for the foreseeable future. Is it an investment? I hate to promise anything, and it's not a promise. But probably, I know these cars have gone up in value, and I suspect that they're going to go up more. If you want one, there's still some affordable examples, much more affordable than similar condition Fox Mustangs. If you're an old Foxbody guy like me, and you find a nice Mark VII, I'd encourage you to jump on it. It's a different experience, it's a much nicer experience, and it's much more compatible with now being an old guy and driving a little Fox Mustang is. So yes, would I recommend it? Yes. If you're someone with no resources and it's difficult for you to keep a car on the road, stick with the Mustang, or maybe stay out of the car hobby, I guess. Thanks for watching. Please leave your comments about the video, about the Mark VIIs and the comparison between Mark VIIs and Mustangs below. Helps me out with YouTube, and we'll see you next time.